Now, why does God want to show it to you? To beat you up? Why does God want to show you sin in your life? To condemn you? Never. He wants to conform you to the image of His Son. He wants to change you. Now, there's a verse that I don't know how people live without. I just don't know how a Christian can survive without 1 John 1:9. 1 John 1:9, this is what it says. It says, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. Now let's take that verse apart. The verse begins with my second most favorite word in the Bible, and that's the word if. So funny, I say to people, what does if mean? And they'll think for a minute and they'll say, if means if. Yeah, if means if. What does if mean? Well, if means you have a choice. If means you can do it or you don't have to. Now, in this book of 1 John, this book was written to people that were believers. They were Christians. They had received Christ into their life. And so the verse says, if you confess your sin. Now, see, it's fun to confess Sam's sin. I just love to confess Sam's sin. But it doesn't do him any good, and it doesn't do me any good. So it doesn't say I'm to confess his, I'm to confess mine. But you see, until I submit myself to God and let Him have control of my life, He doesn't have the freedom to convict me. Therefore, how do I know what to confess? Now, what does the word confess mean? And this is where you have to be responsible to put this verse into practice. The word confess means to agree with God. It means to say the same thing God says. Now, when my little girl went to school, was going to school in the wrong dress, and I jumped all over her and blasted her, I want you to know that she was wrong to do what she did. She tried to trick me, and she was wrong. But you see, that didn't excuse me for the way I reacted to her when she was wrong. I had to be responsible for me, myself, and what I did. And so you have to say, Lord, I agree with you that I was wrong. I was wrong. Now, they were wrong too. I'm not going to make excuses for what Sam does or what Don does or Mark or my other son Sam. I'm not going to make excuses. If they're wrong, they're wrong. But they'll have to take care of it with God. I cannot do that for them. Now, when you confess, what happens? There are two things that happen. And the verse says that God is faithful. Now, that means you can depend on Him. And just. He's righteous and just. To cleanse you. And this is something most people just can't accept. It's too easy. You know, got to be harder than that. I got to do something. Got to be harder. When He cleanses you, He does it because you have agreed and identified what He showed you that you did that was wrong. And when He cleanses you, it's the same as if you go in and you wash your hands in the sink. You go in and you take the soap and you wash your hands and the dirt goes down the drain. I don't think you question that. You don't look and examine and put it under a microscope. You take the soap and you wash and you rinse and down the drain it goes. You don't go get it back up. Your hands are clean. Same with God. Same with your heart. It won't work if you're going to blame somebody else for what you did. But when you agree, He cleanses you. He takes it away. It is gone. It does not come back. That's the hardest thing, I think, for us to believe. That is the most difficult thing for us to accept. I know one time someone said, if you confess your sin, And that means you agree with God. And He forgives you and cleanses you. Have you ever done that? And then you go back and you say, oh, maybe you didn't hear me. Oh, I want to be sure you heard me. Oh, and so you do it all over again. I had a friend say one time, when you do that for the second time, God looks down and He says, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Now, why does God say that? Because in the Bible, it says He puts your sin as far as the east is from the west, and He remembers it no more. That's another thing that's hard to believe. Why is it hard to believe God puts it as far as the east is from the west and remembers it no more? Why? You know why? Because you and I do not have a forgetter. Don't you think that's funny? I think it's funny. See, I have a hard time forgetting what people do to me, don't you? But God forgets it and remembers it no more. I was talking to a girl one time who had done something really terrible, and she said, but I'm going to have to stand before God. She had confessed it, but she couldn't forget it, and she said, I've got to stand before God, and He's going to ask me about it. And I said, are you going to bring it up? She said, well, goodness, no. And I said, well, He can't. He don't remember it. Well, let me just tell you something else that I think is important. This is just something extra. You know, we started off talking about the word iniquity. That iniquity is selfishness and wanting to have my way and determined to get it. Especially if it's right, I'm going to be in control. That's good old type A's, you know. Well, I found 2 verses just this year that have helped me see the importance of what we're talking about. One is Psalm 66:18, I hope. And it says, if I regard iniquity or selfishness or sin in my heart, God will not hear me. If I regard iniquity, if I'm determined and selfish and will not submit and will not do what God tells me to, you know what it says? He doesn't listen. Isn't that something to think? God, you waste your time praying. He doesn't hear you. Will He hear? Oh, yes, He wants to hear you. And the other one is Isaiah 59:2. I know that's right. And that says if I regard iniquity in my heart, I can't hear Him. So when I read the Bible, it's dull and drab and I don't understand it because I am determined I'm going to do it my way if it kills me. And you know, we have to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice. And I'll tell you the greatest sacrifice I've made in my life, I do believe, was confessing my sin when I'm right. I have to give it up. I remember one time when Mark was in high school and he wanted to go to Florida. He was a football star at Mount Brook High School, and he was going to go to Florida, and he came in and he said, Mom, can I go to Florida? And I said, sure, Mark, you can go, and I'll go with you. And he looked at me and he said, excuse me? Big old guy. And I said, you can go, I'll go with you. And he said, I don't believe this. And I said, believe it. He said, Mom, there isn't a mother going. I said, there's one. And he said to me, this is the last straw. I am sick of you. I am sick of God. I'm sick of Christianity. I am sick of this house. And if you do this to me, you have embarrassed me all my life. And if you do this to me, I'm out of here. Now, since he's so much like me, I knew that the only thing I could do was get out of his face. So I went in the bathroom to get away from him. He wouldn't come in there. I locked the door. He's outside. Mom, I am not kidding. If you do this to me, I'm leaving this house and I'll never come back. So I bowed my head over the sink and I said, oh God, my son out there hates me. He wants to leave me. And I wish he would go. I am sick of his mouth. I am sick of his face. I will be so glad to get him out of here. Now, God, the last thing he needs at this moment in his life is a mother that wants to get rid of him. The last thing he needs is a mother that's sick of his mouth. So, God, would you forgive me? Would you forgive me and cleanse me? And would you cause my love to increase and abound toward my son who hates me? Now, I want to tell you honestly, that was a sacrifice. You know what a sacrifice is? It's when you give up something you want to keep. See, I wanted to belt him. I wanted to go say, you want your teeth inside your mouth or out? Because I'm going to knock your face off. That would have been wonderful, wouldn't it? So I came out of the bathroom. I trusted God that my heart was clean and that I loved this child who didn't deserve it, didn't want it, didn't think he needed it. And I went in the kitchen. Mark kept talking. Finally, he got bored. You know, if you can't find somebody to fight with you, it's boring. So he went to his room, and later he came up and he said, Mom, do you want me to take out the garbage? No. Well, Mama, do you need something from the store? No. Now, let me tell you what he was doing, see. He was apologizing. But that is not the way I wanted him to do it. I wanted him to crawl on his knees. You know, you need to see repentance. And I wanted him to bleed. I wanted him to quote Proverbs 31. I wanted him to come and say, Mother, you are the most wonderful thing in the world. Forgive me. He hadn't said that yet. But once again, I had to put into practice what I learned, not what I felt, not what I wanted to do. I had to renew my mind and let God transform my heart. And I had to make a choice. Can I accept his apology my way, or his way, or does it have to be my way? And I decided I would accept it his way. Now, when Mark married, and he and Nancy were getting ready to leave. She probably doesn't even remember this, but I'll never forget it. I didn't see Mark change much. But at the church, when we came out of the church that day, he and Nancy were standing arm in arm, and I thought, why don't they go? They're supposed to be off to their reception. He dropped Nancy's hand, he came over, and he gave me a hug. He didn't say a word. He just hugged me, and then they got in the car and they drove away. I remember standing on the sidewalk there in front of that church, and I watched that limousine go down that street, and they turned left and disappeared from my sight. And I could see their heads in the back window. And I stood on the church and I said, oh God, thank you for the bathroom. Thank you that he hugged me before he left. You see, I don't want him to come back. But I'm thankful that he left with a hug. As he goes to start his own family, I thank you for that. The sacrifice was worth it. And to me, the greatest sacrifice maybe that you'll have to make is when you're ready to belt somebody and you go in the bathroom and lock the door and say, oh God, forgive me and cleanse me and fill my heart with love. In obedience, not because I want to, but because by an act of my will, I choose to be obedient to what you said.